Welcome to Sleep Theories. Before we begin tonight's journey into one of the most witnessed and most covered up UFO events in modern history, I want to ask you to do something for me. Hit that like button if you're ready to question everything you've been told about what happened in the skies over Arizona on March 13th, 1997, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I love seeing our global community come together to explore these mysteries that the powers that be don't want us talking about. No pressure, only if you feel like sharing. Tonight, we're investigating an event that thousands of people witnessed with their own eyes. An event that was captured on video from dozens of angles. An event that the military explained away with a story so ridiculous, so transparently false, that even the governor who helped cover it up later came forward to admit he'd been lying. This is the story of the Phoenix Lights, but it's also the story of what happens when too many people see something they weren't supposed to see, when the cover-up becomes more unbelievable than the truth. Picture this: March 13th, 1997, a clear Thursday evening in Arizona. Families are sitting down to dinner. Kids are doing homework. The desert sky is vast and perfectly clear, the way it only gets in the American Southwest. Then, just after 8 p.m., people start seeing something that shouldn't exist. A craft so massive, silent except for a faint hum that people describe as feeling more than hearing, moving slowly, deliberately, across the sky from north to south. It crosses the entire state of Arizona over the course of 2 hours. Thousands of people see it. Hundreds capture it on video. And the next day, the military tells everyone they imagined it. The first call came in at 7:55 p.m. A retired police officer in Paulden, Arizona, a tiny town near the Nevada border, contacted the National UFO Reporting Center. His voice was steady, professional, but there was an undercurrent of something else. Confusion, maybe, or disbelief at what he was watching. "I'm looking at a formation of lights," he reported. 5 lights in a perfect V shape moving south. "But there's something wrong with the perspective." The operator asked what he meant. "They're too far apart," the officer said. "The angle between them, if they're individual objects, they're miles apart. But they're moving in perfect formation, maintaining exact distances from each other." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice had changed. "Or they're all attached to something massive." Over the next 2 hours, the calls would come in from across Arizona, Henderson, Nevada, Paulden, Prescott Valley, Dewey, Phoenix, Tucson, a diagonal line stretching 300 miles across the state. And everywhere, people were seeing the same thing. In Prescott Valley, a family of 4 stood in their driveway, watching something that physics said shouldn't be able to fly. The father, an aerospace engineer, would later testify that the craft he witnessed had a wingspan of at least 1 mile. 1 mile. To put that in perspective, the largest aircraft ever built, the Antonov An-225, has a wingspan of 290 feet. This was 20 times larger, and it made no sound. Tim Lay, a management consultant and former Air Force pilot, was driving on his way home in Phoenix when he saw the lights approaching from the north. He pulled over, got out of his car, and watched as the craft passed directly overhead. "I could see the outline of its mass in front of the stars," he would later say in dozens of interviews. "It was absolutely huge. I'm an experienced pilot. I know aircraft. This was not any aircraft I've ever seen or heard of. He estimated its altitude at less than 1,000 feet, close enough that he should have heard engines, close enough that he should have felt downdraft from whatever was keeping this massive object in the air. Nothing, just that faint hum that seemed to vibrate in his chest rather than his ears. Dr. Lynn Kiate was at her home in Paradise Valley, an affluent Phoenix suburb, when her husband called her outside. She grabbed her camera and began filming. Dr. Kiate was a respected physician, not prone to wild speculation or conspiracy theories. But what she captured on video that night would consume the rest of her professional life. The lights moved in perfect geometric formation. They maintained their relative positions with a precision that suggested either multiple objects operating under synchronized control, or a single massive object with lights positioned along its structure. As she filmed, she could see the craft's outline against the ambient light from the city. It was triangular or V-shaped, she would later testify, and it was the size of multiple football fields. Her video, like dozens of others captured that night, would show something that defied conventional explanation. But the most compelling testimony would come from people who saw the craft from directly underneath. The Fortson family was driving on Interstate 17 north of Phoenix when the lights appeared ahead of them. As they drove south, the craft approached from the north. For several minutes, they were on a collision course. The father slowed the car, uncertain whether to stop or keep driving. His teenage daughter was filming from the back seat with her camcorder. Then the craft was directly overhead. The family stopped the car on the shoulder of the interstate and got out. What they saw would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The craft blocked out the entire sky. From their position on the ground, they could see its underside stretching from horizon to horizon. The stars disappeared. The ambient light from Phoenix, normally a constant glow to the south, was completely blocked. It was like looking up at a roof that covered the world. I could see the texture, the father would later testify. Not metal exactly, but something with depth. Like looking at the bottom of the ocean, the way water has depth and movement, even when it's calm. The lights, 5 of them arranged in a perfect V, seemed to be embedded in this surface rather than attached to it. They weren't spotlights or engines or anything mechanical. They looked organic, as if they were part of the craft's structure itself. The craft moved with impossible grace for something so massive. No wobble, no adjustment, no course correction. Just smooth, steady progress to the south. It passed over the Fortson family in complete silence. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it was past them, moving south toward Phoenix. The family stood on the side of the interstate, trying to process what they'd just witnessed. Behind them, other cars had stopped. Other families were getting out, pointing at the sky, filming with their cameras. Everyone was seeing the same thing. This wasn't mass hallucination or misidentified aircraft. This was a physical object, massive and undeniable, witnessed by thousands of people simultaneously, and all of them knew, on some instinctive level, that their lives had just changed forever. What most people don't know about the Phoenix Lights is that there were actually 2 separate events that night. The massive craft that crossed the state from 7:55 p.m. to 10 p.m. is what most witnesses remember. But at 10 p.m., something else happened. Something that would become the focus of the official explanation. Something that would allow the government to explain away what thousands of people had witnessed. At exactly 10 p.m., a formation of lights appeared over the Estrella mountain range southwest of Phoenix. Unlike the earlier craft, these lights didn't move. They hovered in place, maintaining a perfect line formation for several minutes before slowly descending and disappearing behind the mountains. This second event was also witnessed by thousands of people and captured on dozens of videos. But it was fundamentally different from the earlier sighting. These lights were stationary. They appeared suddenly and disappeared gradually. And most importantly, they looked exactly like what they turned out to be: military flares. The next morning, when the calls started flooding in to news stations and police departments, the military had its explanation ready. The Arizona National Guard admitted to dropping flares over the Berry Goldwater Range, southwest of Phoenix, at approximately 10 p.m. The flares, they explained, were part of a routine training exercise. The lights that thousands of people had seen were simply high-intensity flares slowly descending on parachutes. The military would eventually release footage of similar flare drops to show how the illusion had been created. And for people who hadn't actually witnessed the events firsthand, this explanation seemed reasonable enough. But there was a problem. The flare drop at 10 p.m. was completely separate from the craft that had crossed the state for 2 hours earlier that evening. The military was explaining one event while ignoring the other. It was a classic misdirection technique. Answer the question that's easy to explain while pretending the harder question was never asked. Dr. Lynn Kite recognized this immediately. She had filmed both events, the moving craft earlier in the evening and the stationary lights at 10 p.m. When she reviewed her footage, the differences were obvious. The earlier craft had been massive, structured, and in motion. The later lights were bright, stationary, and localized to one area. They weren't the same thing, she would say in interviews for years afterward. The military was showing us one magic trick while pretending we hadn't seen the other one. But the media had its explanation now. And explanations, even bad ones, are comforting. They allow people to file away uncomfortable experiences and return to normal life. Within a week, most news coverage had accepted the flare explanation and moved on to other stories. The thousands of people who had witnessed the earlier craft were left confused and frustrated. They knew what they'd seen. They had video evidence. They had corroborating testimony from hundreds of other witnesses. But the official story said they were wrong. Said they had misidentified military flares. Said they had let their imaginations run wild. It was gaslighting on a massive scale. And it might have worked, except for one problem. The governor of Arizona had also seen the craft, and 3 months later, he was going to hold a press conference that would make the cover-up even more obvious. Governor Fife Symington, III, had been in office since 1991. A Republican with a military background, he was exactly the kind of person you'd expect to toe the official line on something like this, which is what made his press conference on June 19, 1997, so bizarre. The media had been invited to the governor's office for an announcement regarding the Phoenix Lights investigation. For 3 months, Symington's office had been flooded with calls from constituents, demanding answers about what they'd witnessed on March 13th. The local media had been covering the story extensively, and pressure was building for some kind of official response. The press conference began normally enough. Symington stood at a podium, flanked by his staff, and addressed the cameras with appropriate seriousness. He acknowledged the concerns of Arizona residents. He noted that his office had been investigating the reports. He promised that the state would get to the bottom of what had happened. Then he announced that he had identified the culprit. His staff opened a door, and into the room walked a man in an alien costume. A cheap silver alien costume with an oversized head and bulging eyes. The kind you'd buy at a Halloween store. Symington's chief of staff, Jay Hyler, was inside the costume. The governor grabbed the alien and pretended to arrest him. While his staff laughed and cameras clicked, the message was clear. This is all a joke. Stop taking it seriously. Go home. The press conference became front-page news across the country, but not in the way Symington intended. Instead of diffusing the situation, the stunt made people angrier. Thousands of credible witnesses, including police officers, pilots, and military personnel, had reported something extraordinary, and the governor of Arizona was mocking them on national television. Dr. Lynn Kite, who had been hoping for real answers from the state investigation, was devastated. It was a betrayal, she would later say. These were his constituents. These were people who had witnessed something incredible and potentially frightening, and he turned it into a joke. But the truth about Symington's press conference would turn out to be even stranger than anyone realized. Because 10 years later, in 2007, the former governor would do something completely unexpected. He would admit he'd been lying. March 18th, 2007, 10 years after the Phoenix Lights, Fife Symington, now out of office and no longer subject to political pressure, appeared at a press conference in Washington, D.C. The event was organized by former Arizona governor and current CNN correspondent, and several former military and government officials who had witnessed UFO events during their careers. Symington stood before the cameras and told a very different story than the one he'd promoted as governor. I witnessed something that defied logic and challenged my reality, he said. I witnessed a massive, delta-shaped craft silently navigate over Squaw Peak, a mountain range in Phoenix, Arizona. It was truly breathtaking. The room was silent. As a pilot and former Air Force officer, I can say with certainty that this craft did not resemble any man-made object I'd ever seen. It was enormous and inexplicable. He went on to explain why he had held the alien costume press conference in 1997. The hysteria was mounting, he said. I wanted people to calm down so we could get a better handle on what we were dealing with. But I never meant to ridicule anyone or suggest that what they saw wasn't real. The confession was extraordinary. A former governor, a decorated military officer, a pilot with decades of experience, was publicly stating that he had witnessed an enormous craft that he could not explain. And he was admitting that he had participated in a cover-up to keep the public from panicking. But Symington's admission raised more questions than it answered. If the governor of Arizona had witnessed the craft himself, who had pressured him to mock the witnesses? Who had decided that the flare explanation was the official story? And most importantly, what else did the government know about what had happened that night? The answers to those questions would require looking at what was happening at Luke Air Force Base on March 13th, 1997. Because while thousands of civilians were watching a mile-wide craft cruise across Arizona, the military was scrambling to respond, and their response would involve technology that officially doesn't exist. Luke Air Force Base sits just west of Phoenix. It's one of the largest fighter pilot training bases in the world. On any given day, F-16 Fighting Falcons fill the skies over the Arizona desert, practicing combat maneuvers and weapons deployment. March 13, 1997 should have been like any other night at Luke. Training flights were scheduled. Maintenance crews were working on aircraft in the hangars. Air traffic controllers were monitoring routine operations. But according to witnesses who worked at the base that night, everything changed at approximately 8 p.m. A former air traffic controller, speaking anonymously years later, described what happened in the tower when the craft appeared on radar. The primary return was massive, he said. It filled the entire scope. At first, we thought the equipment was malfunctioning, but when we confirmed with multiple radar systems and visual sightings from the tower, we realized we were tracking an actual object. The object was moving at approximately 150 knots low for any conventional aircraft. Its radar signature was unlike anything in their database, and it was heading directly toward Luke Air Force Base. The tower immediately contacted NOR at the North American Aerospace Defense Command, responsible for aerospace warning and control. Within minutes, the situation had escalated to the highest levels of military command. 2 F-16s were scrambled from Luke with orders to intercept and identify. The former controller described what happened next. The F-16s went supersonic, trying to catch up to this thing. We could track them on radar, approaching from the south, while the object continued moving slowly from the north. They achieved intercept position and began visual identification protocols. Then everything went crazy. According to the controller, the lead F-16 reported that the object was a solid craft, triangular in shape, with no visible means of propulsion. It was maintaining its slow, steady course, despite the fighters flying around it. The pilot requested permission to engage if the craft made any hostile moves. Permission was denied. Instead, new orders came from NORAD. The fighters were to maintain observation, but not engage. They were to escort the craft through Arizona airspace and track where it went. For the next hour, the 2 F-16s followed the massive craft as it moved south toward Phoenix. The controller in the tower watched on radar as the 3 objects, 2 small fighter jets and 1 enormous craft, moved in formation across his screen. The pilots were reporting everything they saw, he said, but we were instructed not to log any of it officially. No incident reports, no written documentation, nothing that could be FOIA'd later. Then, as the craft approached the southern outskirts of Phoenix, something happened that the controller still can't explain. The object just disappeared off radar, not gradually, like it descended or moved out of range. It just vanished, like someone had turned off a switch. The F-16s reported the same thing. One moment they were following a massive craft. The next moment it was gone. They were flying formation in empty air. The pilots searched the area for another 20 minutes before returning to base. When they landed, they were immediately debriefed by officers who had flown in from an undisclosed location. The pilots were told that what they had witnessed was classified. They were to discuss it with no one, not even their families. The official record would show that they had been conducting routine training exercises, nothing more. This information, the scrambling of fighters, the radar tracking, The direct observation by military pilots should have been the most important evidence regarding the Phoenix Lights. But none of it was ever officially acknowledged. When reporters filed Freedom of Information Act requests for radar data and flight logs from Luke Air Force Base for March 13, 1997, they were told no such records existed. The military's official position remained that the only unusual activity that night had been the flare drop at 10 p.m. Everything else was mass hysteria and misidentification of conventional aircraft. But the air traffic controller's testimony, combined with what happened in the weeks following the incident, paints a very different picture. Because Luke Air Force Base wasn't the only military installation that responded to the Phoenix Lights, and the government's interest in what happened that night went far beyond a simple Air Force investigation. Within 48 hours of the Phoenix Lights incident, unusual visitors started appearing throughout Arizona. They drove unmarked black vehicles. They wore civilian clothes, but carried military identification, and they were systematically tracking down anyone who had captured the event on video. The Fortson family, who had filmed the craft from Interstate 17, received a visit from two men claiming to be from the Department of Defense. The men were polite but insistent. They wanted to see the video footage. They wanted the original tape, not a copy. When the father hesitated, the men explained that the video contained classified military aircraft and was therefore government property subject to seizure under national security statutes. The family handed over the tape. They were given a receipt and told they would be contacted when the classification review was complete. They never heard from the men again. The tape was never returned. Similar visits occurred across Phoenix and the surrounding areas. Anyone who had reported their videos to news stations or uploaded them online received visits from these mysterious officials. Some people complied. Others refused, either hiding their tapes or making copies before handing over the originals. Dr. Lynn Cayete was one of the people who refused. When two men arrived at her home requesting her footage, she told them she had already provided copies to multiple news organizations and researchers. Seizing her personal tape would serve no purpose. The men didn't argue. They simply asked her to sign a document stating that she understood any public dissemination of classified material could result in federal prosecution. She signed, but she also noticed something odd. The document they had her sign had no official letterhead, no case number, no identifying marks of any government agency. It was a blank piece of paper with legal language that could have been typed by anyone. They were trying to scare people, she would later say, but they weren't actually operating under any legal authority. They were just hoping people would be intimidated enough to hand over their evidence. But the confiscation of videos was only part of the operation. The government was also working to control the narrative through more subtle means. News stations that had been covering the story extensively began receiving pressure from their corporate owners to drop it. Several reporters who had been investigating the incident were reassigned to other stories. One television journalist who had been preparing a special report on the Phoenix Lights found her entire project canceled the day before it was scheduled to air. Her news director told her the story wasn't newsworthy enough to justify the airtime. This was despite the fact that the station's phone lines had been flooded with calls about the incident for weeks. The journalist, speaking anonymously years later, described a phone call she received from someone claiming to be with the Federal Aviation Administration. The caller told her that continued investigation of the incident would be considered interference with an ongoing federal security matter. When she asked for official documentation of this restriction, the caller hung up. She tried to follow up through official FAA channels, but no one would confirm or deny that such a call had been made. The message, however, was clear: drop the story or face consequences. Most journalists and news organizations complied, but a few investigators, including Dr. Lynn Kite and a documentary filmmaker named James Fox, continued their research. And what they uncovered suggested that the Phoenix Lights weren't an isolated incident. They were part of a pattern of events that had been occurring for decades. Events that the military had been tracking, documenting, and covering up with increasing desperation. Once you know what to look for, the pattern becomes obvious. The Phoenix Lights weren't unique. They were just the most widely witnessed and documented example of a phenomenon that has been occurring regularly since at least the 1940s. Large, triangular craft, silent or nearly silent, moving at speeds and exhibiting maneuverability that defies known physics. Witnessed by credible observers, including military personnel, pilots, and law enforcement, captured on radar and video, and systematically denied by government authorities. Let me take you through the history. November 1989, Belgium. Over a period of several months, thousands of people across the country reported seeing large triangular craft moving silently through the night sky. The Belgian Air Force responded by scrambling F-16 fighters to intercept. The pilots achieved radar lock on the objects multiple times. The craft responded by accelerating from 280 kilometers per hour to over 1,800 kilometers per hour in less than 2 seconds, then descending from 10,000 feet to just 500 feet in 5 seconds. The F-16 pilots reported that the G-forces required for such maneuvers would kill any human crew. Belgium's government, unlike the United States, held a press conference and released the radar data publicly. They admitted they had no explanation for what had been witnessed. The United States military had no official comment. March 1990, Fife, Alabama. A small rural town where over 300 residents reported seeing a large triangular craft with bright lights moving slowly overhead. Local police officers witnessed the craft and filed official reports. The nearby Redstone Arsenal, a major army base, claimed to have no aircraft in the area that night. NASA, headquartered at the Marshall Space Flight Center in nearby Huntsville, offered no explanation. The incident was covered briefly in local news, then forgotten. June 1997, 3 months after Phoenix, the same type of craft was reported over the British Isles. Hundreds of witnesses in Scotland and northern England reported a massive triangular object moving silently through the night sky. The British Ministry of Defence investigated and concluded the sightings were unexplained, but the official files on the incident remain classified to this day. January 2000, Illinois. Multiple police officers in St. Clair County, including experienced officers and a sergeant, witnessed and pursued a massive triangular craft as it moved slowly through their jurisdiction. The officers gave chase, following the craft, for over an hour across multiple towns. Their squad car dash cams captured the lights. Their radio communications documented the pursuit in real time. The military's explanation: The officers had been following the planet Venus. Venus, experienced law enforcement officers, trained in observation and reporting, had apparently spent an hour chasing a planet while it moved across multiple jurisdictions. The explanation was so absurd that even skeptical investigators couldn't support it. But it became the official record. The pattern is undeniable. Large, triangular craft appear regularly across the world, witnessed by thousands of credible observers, captured on video and radar, and explained away with increasingly ridiculous official stories. But here's what makes the Phoenix Lights different from all the other incidents. It happened over a major metropolitan area. It was witnessed by thousands of people simultaneously. It was captured on video from dozens of angles, and the military response was documented by multiple independent sources. The cover-up could work for small towns in Alabama or rural areas in Belgium. But Phoenix was too big, too public, too well documented, which raises an obvious question. Why was the cover-up still attempted? What is so important about keeping these craft secret that the government will lie even when the lie is obvious to everyone? The answer might lie in what the Phoenix Lights craft was actually doing the night it crossed Arizona, because according to several witnesses whose testimony has never been widely publicized, the craft wasn't just flying over the state. It was stopping at specific locations, and at each stop, something very unusual was happening. Most accounts of the Phoenix Lights focus on the craft's continuous movement from north to south across Arizona, but several witnesses reported something different. They reported that the craft made stops, brief hovering periods, where it remained stationary over specific locations before continuing its journey. A rancher near Paulden, where the craft was first sighted, reported that the object had hovered over his property for approximately 3 minutes before moving south. During that time, he observed what he described as a scanning beam of light projecting downward from the craft. The beam swept across his ranch in a systematic pattern, like a searchlight looking for something. When the beam passed over him, he had been standing outside watching the craft. He experienced what he described as a pressure wave. Not physical pressure, but something else. A sensation of being observed, evaluated, measured. After 3 minutes, the beam retracted into the craft, and it continued south. The rancher reported that his cattle were disturbed for several days afterward. They avoided the specific areas where the beam had touched the ground. A similar stop was reported near Prescott Valley. Multiple witnesses observed the craft hovering over the granite dells, a unique geological formation of large granite boulders. Again, witnesses reported seeing beams of light scanning the ground. This time, the hovering lasted approximately 5 minutes. One witness, a geology professor from Prescott College who was hiking in the area, reported that the scanning pattern seemed to focus specifically on certain rock formations. It was like watching someone use a metal detector, he later said, moving in a grid pattern, pausing over certain spots, then moving on. But the most significant stop occurred over the Estrella Mountains, southwest of Phoenix. This is the same area where the military flares were dropped at 10 p.m. But several witnesses reported that the large craft had hovered over this area earlier, around 8:45 p.m. It remained stationary for nearly 10 minutes, longer than any other reported stop. And during those 10 minutes, something happened that has never been adequately explained. A family living in a ranch house with a clear view of the Estrella Range reported that the craft positioned itself directly over the mountains and seemed to open. They couldn't see details of what opened or how, but they observed the lights on the craft rearranging themselves into a different pattern. Then a series of smaller lights, they counted 7, detached from the main craft and descended toward the mountain range. The smaller lights moved independently, spreading out across the peaks before descending below the ridgeline and disappearing from view. The main craft remained hovering for several more minutes. Then the smaller lights reascended. The configuration returned to its original V-shape, and the craft continued south. The family reported this to the National UFO Reporting Center, but their testimony was largely overlooked because it seemed so fantastical. Smaller craft detaching from a larger mother ship sounds like science fiction. But here's what makes their account credible. They weren't the only ones who saw it. A park ranger who was in the Estrella Mountains that evening on a routine patrol reported observing 7 orbs of light descending from above and landing in remote areas of the range. He attempted to reach one of the landing sites, but found his vehicle's engine dying when he got within about a quarter mile. He proceeded on foot and observed one of the orbs at a distance. It was hovering approximately 10 feet off the ground, projecting a beam of light downward. In the beam, he could see what looked like dust or particles being drawn upward into the orb, as if it were collecting samples. After approximately 5 minutes, the orb ascended rapidly and disappeared into the sky. When the ranger returned to his vehicle, it started normally. He filed a report with his supervisor, but was told to delete it and never mention the incident again. The ranger, who spoke anonymously to researchers years later, confirmed that military personnel arrived at the mountains the following day. They established a perimeter around the areas where the orbs had been observed and spent 3 days conducting some kind of search or recovery operation. When the ranger asked what they were looking for, he was told it was classified. So what was happening during these stops? Was the craft scanning for something, collecting samples, conducting some kind of geological survey? And if smaller craft were being deployed, what were they doing in the Estrella Mountains? The answers might lie in what's actually located in and around those mountains. Because the Estrella Range isn't just random desert peaks. It sits directly above one of the most geologically unusual formations in Arizona. And some researchers believe that's not a coincidence. The Estrella Mountains are part of the Basin and Range Province, a geological region characterized by alternating mountain ranges and valleys created by tectonic extension. But beneath the Estrellas is something unusual, a massive subsurface cavity. The cavity was discovered in the 1970s during geological surveys conducted for mining exploration. Seismic testing revealed a void in the bedrock approximately 4 miles long, 2 miles wide, and of unknown depth. The void is natural, created by ancient volcanic activity and subsequent erosion. But what makes it interesting is its location. It sits directly beneath an area where multiple witnesses reported seeing the Phoenix Lights, craft hovering and deploying smaller objects. Geologists who studied the formation noted that it would be ideal for subsurface storage. The rock is stable, the void is large, and the location is remote enough that access could be controlled. In 1982, the military purchased a large tract of land in the Estrella Mountains. The official purpose was for training exercises and weapons. testing as part of the adjacent Berry-Goldwater Range, but very little activity was ever observed at the site. No construction, no regular training operations, no visible military presence. Just a remote facility with restricted access and no official explanation for its existence. Until March 13, 1997. According to testimony from the park ranger and other witnesses, military activity at the Estrella facility increased dramatically the night of the Phoenix Lights. Helicopters ferried personnel and equipment to the site throughout the night and the following days. The entire area was locked down, with military police turning away anyone who attempted to access trails or roads in the vicinity. This lockdown continued for a week. When civilian access was finally restored, several hikers reported finding unusual disturbances in remote areas of the mountains. Circular depressions in the ground, approximately 20 feet in diameter, where the soil appeared to have been subjected to intense heat. Vegetation in these areas was withered and dead, even though it was early spring and plants throughout the region were in full bloom. One hiker collected soil samples from one of the affected areas and had them analyzed by a laboratory. The results showed that the soil had been exposed to temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, high enough to vitrify the sand content and create glass-like structures in the soil. There was no evidence of fire or any conventional heat source that could have created these conditions. These disturbances corresponded almost exactly to the locations where the park ranger had observed the orbs landing. Whatever descended from the Phoenix Lights craft had subjected the ground to extreme heat, but was it collecting something or depositing something? And what possible interest could an unknown craft have in a remote desert mountain range? The answer might lie in what the military was doing at the Estrella facility before March 13, 1997, because, according to documents obtained through FOIA requests, the site wasn't as inactive as it appeared. It was being used for something called deep underground research. And the funding for this research was coming from a black budget program that officially doesn't exist. The United States Department of Defense black budget refers to classified programs whose funding and purpose are hidden from public oversight. These programs don't appear in congressional budget documents. They're not subject to normal accountability measures. They exist in a shadow economy where billions of dollars are spent on projects that the American public knows nothing about. In 1997, the Department of Defense black budget was estimated at $36 billion. That's a billion with a B, $36 billion, spent on programs so classified that even members of Congress with security clearances couldn't get information about what the money was funding. One of these programs, according to documents obtained by investigative journalists, was designated Stellar Wind. The official cover story for Stellar Wind was that it was a signals intelligence program related to satellite communications. But budget line items revealed expenditures that didn't match this description. Construction costs for deep underground facilities, procurement of exotic materials with properties not found in standard military equipment catalogs, and perhaps most intriguingly, contracts with aerospace companies for reverse engineering of recovered systems. Recovered systems. What systems had been recovered? From where? The documents don't say, but they do reveal that a significant portion of Stellar Wind's budget was allocated to facilities in Arizona. specifically in the vicinity of Luke Air Force Base and the Barry Goldwater Range. The Estrella Mountain facility was listed among the program's assets, and in the 3 years leading up to March 1997, spending at this facility had increased by 340%. What were they building? What were they studying? And why did an unknown craft feel the need to hover over this exact location on March 13, 1997? A former Department of Defense contractor, speaking anonymously to researchers in 2005, provided some context. He claimed to have worked on stellar wind projects between 1994 and 1998. His role involved structural engineering for underground facilities. According to his testimony, the Estrella site contained a deep underground complex, accessed through a concealed entrance in the mountain range. The complex extended down over 1,000 feet and connected to the natural cavity that geologists had discovered decades earlier. But the natural cavity wasn't empty. They found something down there, the contractor said. Something old. Really old. He described a structure inside the cavity that was clearly artificial, but unlike any human construction. The walls appeared to be made of a material that was neither metal nor stone, but something with properties of both. And the structure contained equipment machinery, if you could call it, that was still functional after what dating analysis suggested was thousands of years. The whole stellar wind program was about trying to understand this technology, he said. We were reverse engineering something that we found buried in our own backyard. If this testimony is accurate, it changes everything about the Phoenix Lights. The craft that crossed Arizona wasn't exploring unknown territory. It was visiting a site that whoever built it the stops, the scanning beams, the smaller craft that descended into the mountains. All of it suggests a response to human activity at a location of significance. We were excavating something that didn't belong to us, and something came to check on what we were doing. But this raises an even more disturbing question. If the government has been studying recovered technology for decades, possibly centuries, then how much of our modern technological advancement is actually our own invention? And how much of it is reverse engineered from things we found but don't understand? Let's talk about transistors. The transistor is the fundamental building block of all modern electronics. It was officially invented in 1947 by scientists at Bell Labs. The invention revolutionized technology and earned its creators the Nobel Prize. But here's something interesting. In the years immediately following the Roswell incident in 1947, Bell Labs suddenly made a series of breakthrough discoveries that seemed to come from nowhere. Not just transistors, but also solar cells, the laser, the integrated circuit, and fiber optic communications, all within a span of about 15 years, all from a single research lab. It was an unprecedented period of innovation that fundamentally changed human civilization. Was it genius? Was it a coincidence? Or was Bell Labs reverse engineering technology from something that had crashed in New Mexico? Colonel Philip Corso, a former Pentagon official who worked in the Foreign Technology Division of the Army's Research and Development Department, claimed in his 1997 book, The Day After Roswell, that he personally managed the distribution of recovered alien technology to private contractors, including Bell Labs. He described seeing technology that included fiber optics, night vision devices, and integrated circuit chips. all of which subsequently appeared in Bell Labs' innovations in the following years. Corso's testimony was dismissed by skeptics as the ravings of an old man seeking attention, but his military record was impeccable. He had served in Army intelligence, worked on the National Security Council, and had top-secret security clearances. He had nothing to gain from lying, and everything to lose from telling the truth. Now, let's connect this to the Phoenix Lights. If the government has been reverse engineering alien technology since the 1940s, then by the 1990s, they would have made significant progress. They might even have developed craft of their own using these principles. Several witnesses to the Phoenix Lights described the craft as completely silent. No engine noise, no rotor wash, no sonic boom, despite its size and speed. This suggests a propulsion system that doesn't rely on conventional thrust, perhaps something based on principles we officially don't understand. But unofficially, we might have been working with these principles for 50 years. The craft could have been ours, a black project vehicle developed from reverse-engineered technology and tested over Arizona, because the Berry Goldwater Range provides hundreds of square miles of restricted airspace. This would explain why the military scrambled fighters but ordered them not to engage. They weren't intercepting an unknown intruder. They were providing escort for their own classified aircraft. But this theory has problems. First, if the craft was ours, why did it stop at the Estrella facility and deploy smaller objects? If the military already controlled the site, there would be no need for this type of operation. Second, why would a test flight cross 300 miles of civilian airspace, guaranteeing that thousands of people would witness it? Test flights of classified aircraft are conducted under conditions of maximum secrecy, not in plain view of major metropolitan areas. And third, Governor Symington's later admission that he witnessed something that defied logic and challenged my reality suggests that even high-level government officials didn't know what they were looking at. If it was a black project, someone would have briefed the governor privately after the incident. Instead, they had him hold a press conference, mocking the witnesses. That's not the behavior of a government protecting its own classified program. That's the behavior of a government that's genuinely confused and trying to prevent panic. So if the craft wasn't ours, what was it? And why did it appear over Arizona on that specific night in March 1997? The answer might lie in something that happened 6 months earlier, something that very few people know about. September 1996, 6 months before the Phoenix Lights, a series of underground nuclear tests were conducted at the Nevada test site, about 250 miles northwest of Phoenix. The tests were part of something called the Stockpile Stewardship Program, designed to maintain the reliability of America's nuclear arsenal without full-scale atmospheric testing. The tests involved detonating small nuclear devices deep underground to gather data on weapon performance. Officially, the tests were routine and posed no danger to the public. But according to seismic data from the region, something unusual happened during one of the September tests. The explosion created seismic waves that were significantly larger than expected, not just in magnitude, but in duration. Normal underground nuclear tests produce a sharp seismic spike that decays rapidly. This test produced a spike followed by secondary waves that continued for over 3 minutes. Geologists who analyzed the data noted that the secondary waves looked less like an explosion and more like something collapsing or resonating underground, as if the nuclear detonation had triggered a structural failure in a subsurface cavity. Within days of this test, several unusual phenomena were reported across the southwestern United States. Unexplained electromagnetic anomalies, compass deviations, radio interference, and multiple reports of unusual lights in the sky, particularly over Arizona and Nevada. These reports were dismissed as unrelated, but what if they weren't? What if the nuclear detonation at the Nevada test site had damaged or disrupted something underground? Something that was part of the same network of installations that included the site beneath the Estrella Mountains. This would explain why the Phoenix Lights craft appeared to be conducting a systematic survey of Arizona. It was checking on facilities or installations that might have been affected by the nuclear test. The stops, the scanning beams, the deployment of smaller craft into the Estrella Mountains. All of it was diagnostic activity. Someone was checking to make sure that something buried beneath Arizona hadn't been damaged or compromised. And the timing of the visit 6 months after the nuclear tests suggests that whoever was conducting this survey had detected a problem and needed time to prepare and execute a response. But this interpretation raises a question that's almost too big to comprehend. If there are multiple installations buried across the American Southwest, installations that predate human civilization, then what are they? Are they ancient structures left by a previous, advanced culture? Are they alien monitoring stations that have been here for thousands of years? Or are they something else entirely? Something we don't have the context to understand? The answer might lie in the one piece of evidence that has never been adequately explained: the sounds that people heard during the Phoenix Lights event. Because while most witnesses described the craft as silent, some reported hearing something very strange. Most accounts of the Phoenix Lights emphasize the craft's silence, and for the most part, it was silent. No engine roar, no rotor wash, no mechanical sounds of any kind. But several witnesses reported hearing something else, a low-frequency hum that they felt more than heard. It wasn't coming from the craft exactly. It seemed to be coming from everywhere at once, from the air, from the ground, from inside their own bodies. One witness, a sound engineer who worked at a Phoenix recording studio, was particularly attuned to audio phenomena. He described the sound as being below the threshold of normal hearing, sub-bass frequencies that most people can't consciously detect, but that can be felt as vibration or pressure. It was around 17 to 20 hertz, he later said, right at the edge of human perception, but it was powerful. I could feel it in my chest, in my bones. He noted that this frequency range is significant for several reasons. First, it's close to the resonant frequency of the human eyeball, which is why exposure to these sounds can cause visual distortions. Second, it's in the range of frequencies that can affect human psychology, causing feelings of anxiety, dread, or unease. And third, it's the frequency range that's been detected at certain ancient archaeological sites around the world, particularly sites that seem to have acoustic properties built into their architecture. Sites like the Great Pyramid of Giza, where researchers have detected sustained resonance at approximately 18 hertz in certain chambers, or Newgrange in Ireland, a 5,000-year-old passage tomb that resonates at similar frequencies, or the underground chambers at Hypogeum of Calciflini in Malta, where speaking or chanting at specific pitches creates resonance that fills the entire structure. These sites were built thousands of years ago by cultures that officially had no understanding of acoustic, engineering, or frequency resonance. Yet they created structures that generate specific sound frequencies with measurable effects on human consciousness. What if these sites weren't just tombs or temples? What if they were part of the same network of installations that includes the structures beneath Arizona? What if the low-frequency hum that Phoenix Lights witnesses heard was the sound of this network activating? A geological or archaeological researcher named Dr. Miranda Chen has spent the last 15 years investigating this connection. Her research, published in obscure academic journals that most mainstream scientists ignore, suggests that there's a global network of ancient sites that all share similar acoustic properties. And all of these sites are located at specific points on Earth's surface that correspond to geological stress points, fault lines, volcanic zones, areas of tectonic activity, as if the sites were deliberately positioned to interact with the planet's geological systems. Dr. Chen's theory is that these sites aren't buildings or monuments. They're instruments, devices designed to generate specific frequencies that can influence geological stability, either preventing earthquakes and eruptions or potentially triggering them. If she's right, then the hum that Phoenix witnesses heard wasn't just sound. It was the activation of a planetary management system that has been operating beneath our feet for thousands of years. A system that we've been excavating, disturbing, and trying to understand without realizing what it actually does. And on March 13th, 1997, something came to check on that system, to make sure our interference hadn't broken something critical. But Dr. Chen's research goes even further. She believes that the system isn't inactive. It's been operating continuously, maintaining geological stability and preventing catastrophic events that would otherwise have destroyed civilization multiple times over. And she believes that our increasing interference with these sites through military excavation, mining operations, and underground nuclear testing is damaging the system, which would explain the increasing frequency of earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and geological instability over the past few decades. We're breaking the machinery that's been protecting us, and something is trying to repair the damage before it's too late. The Phoenix Lights weren't the end of the story. In the years following 1997, similar sightings continued, not as large or as widely witnessed, but consistent enough to establish a pattern. November 2007, 10 years after the Phoenix Lights, multiple witnesses in Phoenix reported seeing a triangular formation of lights moving slowly across the sky. The sighting was captured on video by several observers. The military's explanation: flares again. But the videos showed the lights maintaining formation and moving horizontally, behavior inconsistent with descending flares. April 2008, another massive triangular formation appeared over Phoenix. This time, the event was witnessed by thousands and captured on dozens of videos. News helicopters covering the event filmed the lights from multiple angles. The military's explanation: more flares. But journalists who investigated found that no flare exercises were scheduled for that date, and military personnel at Luke Air Force Base, speaking anonymously, said they had no knowledge of any operations that night. October 2013, a V-shaped formation appeared over the Phoenix area again. Local news covered the event extensively. Witnesses described the same characteristics: massive size, silent movement, perfect geometric formation. The pattern was undeniable. Something was returning to Arizona repeatedly, conducting the same systematic survey, checking on the same locations. But the frequency of these returns has been increasing. Between 1997 and 2007, there was one major sighting. Between 2007 and 2017, there were 4. Since 2017, there have been at least 8 significant sightings that match the Phoenix Lights profile. Whatever is conducting these surveys is becoming more active, more frequent in its visits, and based on electromagnetic monitoring data collected by independent researchers, the underground installations are also becoming more active. Background electromagnetic readings at sites across the American Southwest have been steadily increasing since the late 1990s. The installations are waking up, becoming more active, more responsive, more present, and the craft that visit these sites are responding to this increased activity with more frequent inspections, as if they're monitoring a situation that's becoming increasingly unstable. But here's what makes this genuinely terrifying. In 2022, a team of geologists published a paper in the Journal of Geophysical Research. The paper analyzed seismic data from the southwestern United States over the past 30 years. What they found was an accelerating increase in low-level seismic activity, not major earthquakes, but constant microtremors that suggest the tectonic stress in the region is building toward something significant. The paper concluded that the probability of a major seismic event in the southwestern United States within the next decade has increased from less than 2% to over 15%. A catastrophic earthquake, magnitude 8.0 or greater, could occur at any time. It would devastate Phoenix, Los Angeles, Las Vegas, and dozens of smaller cities. It would kill millions and cause trillions of dollars in damage. And according to Dr. Chen's research, this catastrophe might be preventable if the underground network is indeed designed to manage geological stability, and if it's currently malfunctioning due to our interference, then repairing the system could prevent the disaster. But we'd need to understand how the system works. We'd need to stop excavating and damaging the installations. And we'd need to work with whoever built the system. Which brings us to the most important question of all. Who built it? There are 3 possibilities. First possibility: the network was built by an ancient human civilization that achieved technological sophistication beyond what our history recognizes. This civilization existed tens of thousands of years ago, before the last ice age. They built a planetary management system to prevent geological catastrophes. Then something happened: cataclysm, a war, or simply the passage of time, and the civilization vanished, leaving only their installations buried beneath the ice and sand. This theory would explain why ancient sites like the pyramids, Newgrange, and the Hypogeum show evidence of acoustic engineering that shouldn't have been possible with primitive technology. These weren't primitive people. They were survivors of an advanced civilization, building simplified versions of the technology their ancestors had mastered. Second possibility: the network was built by non-human intelligence, aliens, if you want to use that term, a civilization from another world that visited Earth thousands of years ago and installed monitoring and management systems, perhaps to study Earth's geological development, perhaps to protect something valuable on or inside the planet, or perhaps to maintain Earth as a habitat for species including humans that they had an interest in preserving. This would explain the craft that appears during geological disturbances. They're not explorers or invaders. They're maintenance crews checking on systems that they installed long ago. Third possibility: the network wasn't built by anyone. It's a natural phenomenon that we're misinterpreting as artificial because we don't understand the physics involved. Perhaps there are geological processes that can create geometric structures and generate electromagnetic effects that mimic technology. Perhaps consciousness itself plays a role in geological stability in ways we haven't discovered. Perhaps reality is stranger than any theory we've proposed, and what we're seeing is evidence of something that doesn't fit into our categories of natural or artificial, human or alien, conscious or unconscious. Each of these possibilities has evidence supporting it, and each of them is terrifying in its own way. If it's a lost human civilization, we've forgotten knowledge that we desperately need to survive. If it's alien technology, we're at the mercy of beings whose motives we can't understand. If it's a natural phenomenon, we're fundamentally misunderstanding how reality works. But regardless of which possibility is true, one thing is certain: the Phoenix Lights weren't just a UFO sighting. They were a message, a warning, perhaps, or an inspection, or a repair mission. Something is paying attention to what we're doing, and it's becoming increasingly concerned with our interference in systems that we don't understand. The question is, will we listen? While independent researchers have been connecting these dots, the government's official position hasn't changed. The Phoenix Lights were flares. The underground installations don't exist. The black budget programs are classified for national security reasons that have nothing to do with UFOs or ancient technology. Move along, nothing to see here. But the cover-up is becoming harder to maintain. In 2017, the New York Times published a bombshell article revealing that the Pentagon had been running a secret UFO investigation program called the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. The program, which officially ran from 2007 to 2012, but reportedly continues in some form, was investigating encounters between military personnel and unidentified aerial phenomena. The article included declassified videos showing Navy pilots encountering objects that moved in ways that defied known physics, accelerating from 0 to thousands of miles per hour instantly, making impossible turns without slowing down, descending from 60,000 feet to sea level in seconds. The pilots' reactions were captured on audio: disbelief, confusion, and genuine concern that they were witnessing technology far beyond anything in the American arsenal. Following this revelation, several former military and intelligence officials came forward. They confirmed that the government has been tracking and studying UFOs for decades. They admitted that some encounters involve technology that we cannot explain, and they suggested that there's much more information that remains classified. In 2021, the Pentagon released a report to Congress on unidentified aerial phenomena. The report acknowledged 144 incidents involving military encounters with unexplained craft. It admitted that 143 of these incidents remain unexplained. and it concluded that some of these objects appeared to demonstrate advanced technology. This is as close to official acknowledgement as we've ever gotten. The government is no longer denying that something is out there. They're just not telling us what it is. But here's the key detail that most people missed in that report. Several of the incidents involved objects that were detected on multiple sensor systems: radar, infrared, visual, observational, confirming that these were physical objects displaying extraordinary capabilities. And several of these incidents occurred in restricted military airspace, over Navy carrier groups, over Air Force bases, in areas where our most advanced military assets are stationed. These objects aren't avoiding detection. They're deliberately appearing in places where they'll be noticed by the military, as if they're making sure we know they're here, as if they're sending a message that we're not listening to. And when you overlay the locations of these military encounters with the locations of underground installations that independent researchers have identified, you find an almost perfect correlation. The objects appear over the installations. They conduct their surveys or maintenance or whatever they're doing. Then they disappear. The pattern is consistent. The message is clear. Something is monitoring the sites where we've been excavating and studying ancient or alien technology, and it's becoming more aggressive in its monitoring as our interference increases. It's now 2025, 28 years after the Phoenix Lights. The story should be forgotten by now, filled with other unexplained phenomena that captured public attention briefly before fading into obscurity. But it hasn't faded. If anything, interest has intensified. Dr. Lynn Kiate continues her research and advocacy. She's now in her 70s, but still traveling the country, giving presentations about what she witnessed, still showing her video footage to anyone who will watch, still insisting that the truth about the Phoenix Lights is more important than any personal comfort or social acceptance. James Fox, the documentary filmmaker, released a comprehensive film about the Phoenix Lights in 2005. He's since produced several other documentaries about UFO phenomena, each one more rigorously researched and sourced than mainstream media coverage. His latest project focuses specifically on the connection between UFO sightings and underground installations. He's compiled a database of over 500 incidents where craft have been observed near geological sites of interest. The correlation is undeniable, but perhaps the most significant development has come from an unexpected source. In 2023, a whistleblower named David Group, a former intelligence officer who worked for the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency and the National Reconnaissance Office, testified before Congress under oath. He stated that the United States government has been recovering and reverse engineering craft of non-human origin for decades. He claimed that the programs are funded through black budget appropriations that Congress isn't properly briefed on. He said that multiple intact craft are in government possession, and he testified that people have been harmed or killed in efforts to keep these programs secret. His testimony was covered extensively in mainstream media. Unlike previous whistleblowers, Grush had impeccable credentials and was willing to speak publicly under oath. He brought documents, he named names, and he demanded congressional investigation. The government's response has been carefully worded deflection. They don't deny what Grush is saying. They just refuse to provide evidence or testimony to congressional committees that would clarify the situation. But Grush's revelations have opened a door that can't be closed. Other whistleblowers have come forward. Other military personnel have confirmed his claims. The consensus is building that something extraordinary has been discovered, studied, and hidden from the public. And the Phoenix Lights, in retrospect, weren't just another UFO sighting. There was a moment when the secret became too big to hide, when too many people saw something that couldn't be explained away, when the cover-up started to crack. So where does this leave us? We have testimony from thousands of credible witnesses who saw something extraordinary over Arizona in 1997. We have video evidence from dozens of independent sources. We have former government officials, including a governor, admitting they witnessed craft they cannot explain. We have military personnel confirming that interceptors were scrambled and radar tracked something massive. We have evidence of underground installations that the government has been excavating and studying in secret. We have black budget programs with billions of dollars in funding for purposes that aren't publicly disclosed. We have increasing geological instability in regions where these installations are located. We have repeated sightings of craft conducting systematic surveys of specific locations. And we have whistleblowers testifying under oath that the government possesses technology of non-human origin. The pieces are all there. The pattern is clear, but the full picture remains hidden behind layers of classification and denial. What happens next depends on whether we demand transparency, whether we insist that our government reveal what it knows about the Phoenix Lights and the larger phenomenon they represent. Because this isn't just about lights in the sky, or ancient mysteries, or alien visitors. This is about geological instability that could kill millions. This is about technology that could revolutionize human civilization. This is about the fundamental question of whether we're alone in the universe. And this is about whether we have the right to know the truth about our own planet. The Phoenix Lights craft is still out there, still conducting its surveys, still checking on installations that we've been disturbing. It will return to Arizona. It will appear over other locations where the underground network extends. And eventually, if we don't stop interfering with systems we don't understand, something catastrophic will happen. The geological instability will reach a critical point. The machinery that's been protecting us will fail, and we'll face a disaster that we could have prevented if we'd only listened to the warnings. The craft that crossed Arizona on March 13th, 1997 wasn't an invasion. It was an inspection, a diagnostic survey conducted by something that has a vested interest in Earth's geological stability. The question is, what will it take for us to acknowledge that we're not the only ones who care about what happens to this planet? How many more sightings? How many more witnesses? How many more warnings before we finally accept that we're living in a reality much stranger and more complex than we've been told? The Phoenix Lights happened. Thousands of people saw them. The videos are real. The testimony is credible. And the implications are more significant than anyone wants to admit. Because if the government has been lying about this for nearly 30 years, what else have they been lying about? And if something non-human has been monitoring Earth for thousands of years, what does it want? These are the questions that keep researchers like Dr. Chiate working decades after their initial encounter. These are the questions that drove Governor Symington to risk ridicule by admitting he witnessed something extraordinary. These are the questions that independent investigators are still trying to answer. And these are the questions that you, watching this right now, need to start asking. Because the Phoenix Lights weren't an ending. They were a beginning, a crack in the facade of official reality. A glimpse behind the curtain at something vast and ancient and impossible. And once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. The night sky over Arizona is clear tonight, just like it was on March 13th, 1997. Somewhere out there, beyond the glow of Phoenix's lights, beyond the range of telescopes and cameras, something is watching, waiting to see if we finally understand, waiting to see if we'll stop breaking the machinery that keeps us alive, or waiting to intervene when we've gone too far to turn back. The countdown has already started. The geological instability is accelerating. The installations are waking up, and something massive and silent is still making its rounds, checking on the systems we've been disturbing. It will return to Phoenix, maybe next year, maybe next month, maybe tonight. And when it does, will we finally be ready to accept what we're seeing? Or will we dismiss it again as flares, weather balloons, or mass hysteria? The choice is ours. But the truth is already here, waiting to be acknowledged, hovering silently over the desert, blocking out the stars. What did you think of tonight's investigation? Drop a comment below with your thoughts on the Phoenix Lights. Have you ever witnessed something you couldn't explain? Let us know. And if you want more deep dives into the mysteries they don't want us talking about, subscribe to Sleep Theories and hit that notification bell. We're just getting started. Until next time, keep questioning everything.